And then we'll be at Valen's house tomorrow.
Afternoon everyone, I hope you're all well. And this is the Church of St Margaret's of Antioch in Barking. And I have covered this one before, a while ago now, but the tour you're going to see today is far more extensive, and there's a very special twist to the tour, as I'll explain in a minute. But the church originated as a chapel for local people within the grounds of Barking Abbey, to the south of the Abbey Church. Its oldest part is the chancel, built in the early 13th century, during the reign of King John, and at that point it was believed to have been used as a chapel for the nuns. The building is said to have been made into a parish church in 1300 by Anne de Vere, Abbess of Barking Abbey. So, all that survives of the old abbey are the ruins, this church, and the curfew tower here, which was originally built in the 13th century but was rebuilt in the form that we see it in about 1460. Here a nice view of its bell tower and the church hall, which was a much more recent addition. You'll now join me inside the church, first for a little look at some remnants from the abbey, and then the special something I told you about. For the first time in many, many years, probably since the time of the Reformation, you'll hear the chanting of Latin plain song to begin our tour inside the church. So, in we go. Welcome to the inside of the church, and now for the first time in many, many, many years you'll hear the Latin chanting of plain song within this church, which I should think the old nuns of the abbey would have liked. was nice to hear, wasn't it? And what you're looking at here is known as the Armada Font. The font is said to have been given to the church by sailors grateful for their lives returning from the Spanish Armada. And on top, the beautiful font cover is a later addition. And it was designed by Jessie Jack, the daughter of arts and crafts figure George Jack. Straight down the nave. The pews are beautiful things in their own right, but I'll show you my favourite one. This one here, with the dog heads carved onto it. And up there on the chancel arch, which I'll show you and zoom in a minute, are traces of the original medieval painted interior. And it's preserved on the chancel arch. It's presumed that these were once part of a much larger representation of the doom, a doom scene painted on a tympanum stretched across the arch. On the left bracket you can see spires and minarets, while on the right a female figure riding a panther-like animal, clutching its tail in one hand and a flagon in the other. The spires on the left are thought to represent heaven, while the female figure represents gluttony, one of the 7 deadly sins. She is the sin of gluttony. And here we have a representation of heaven. Here are the church wardens' seats. Pews, and to go along with those, here are the church wardens' staffs or rods of office. The chancel screen that you see here is Victorian and was given in memory of Philip Marriott, who was a young man whose life was lost at sea off the south coast of New Zealand. And he was aged 19. Here we have the choir stalls, and walking into the chancel, The church was extensively restored in first the 18th century, then the 19th century, and then in the late 1920s, but the chancel here is the oldest part of St Margaret's Church. Here's its organ. The large pipe organ dominates this area. The gilded pipes and facade date back to around 1770 and belong to the original organ installed by Byfield and Green. The organ was substantially reconstructed by J.W. Walker and Sons in 1855 and in 1888 underwent a major reconstruction, replacing most of the original 18th and 19th century mechanisms. In 1991, the console was converted to a fully electric operation. And we are within the chancel now, which is acknowledged as the oldest part of the church and dates to the 13th century. But the ceiling that you see was probably part of the 1770 restoration work that was done in this church. And a real amazing piece of history is this stone here. And this is one of the finest pieces of medieval art in St Margaret's. It's a large stone engraved with a representation of Martinus, the first recorded vicar of Barking from 1315, and he was vicar from 1315 to around 1328. And here's the Last Supper window. The Large Supper window over the main altar, which of course depicts the Last Supper, dates from this significant repairs carried out on the church in 1848. It was donated by Reverend Robert Liddell, who served as vicar of Barking between 1836 and 1851. And you'll now join me in the Fisherman's or Youth Chapel. And this area is known as the Fisherman's Chapel and also known as the Youth Chapel. But these are very interesting up the top here, and they're fairly scarce examples of the work of George Jacks. And I'll walk you around the side here and we'll go from there to back around here and tell you who they are. First up here you have James Cook, the man who's said to have discovered Australia, as it were. And his connection to the church I'll show you now. Here you see Captain James Cook and his wife Elizabeth Batts, and they married here in Barking. And here's the copy of their marriage entry. So that's Captain James Cook, and another famous figure linked to this church is Elizabeth Fry. Most famous for being a prison reformer and a Quaker, and she's buried in the old Quaker burying ground, which is not too far from here, and I'll be doing a video on that soon. She also had links to this church as well, so that's why she's shown here. And our next figure, you'll have to join me back round the front, is St Ethelburga, the first abbess of Barking, and of course a saint canonised after her death, because both in life and in death around her last resting place, miracles are said to have occurred around St Ethelburga. And this being the Fisherman's Chapel, you have figures of fishermen who flank in the centre there St Nicholas, the patron saint of children. Here we have this beautiful stained glass window in the Fisherman's Chapel, which has lots of nautical themes on it, shall we say. Barking once held one of the greatest and biggest fishing fleets in the country, and there you can see a ship out at sea, or a boat out at sea to the left, and to the right you can see Barking Creek, or what would have passed for a harbour in those days, with the town of Barking and the church tower of St Margaret's in the background. And that is why this chapel has one name of the Fisherman's Chapel, but also being called the Youth Chapel. And this painting above the altar in the Fisherman's or Youth Chapel is called Early in the Morning, and is painted by Reverend Alan Stewart. It depicts Jesus sitting by the Sea of Galilee after the resurrection, preparing a meal for his followers. It's a striking illustration of the rich diversity of Barking and St Margaret's congregation in the 21st century, and if you look very closely on the right hand side, you may be able to make out a representation of civil rights activist Rosa Parks. The painting was given to St Margaret's in memory of Patricia Joyce Osborne by her family in 2005, and has been displayed ever since. So to the right there, you've got Rosa Parks. And these box pews that you see here would once have lined the whole wall along here. And I'm going to take you to my favourite piece of stained glass. But before we go there, this is the tomb of Clement Sisley. If you look up Eastbury Manor House near Barking, that was where he lived. And that is his tomb. And this is known as the Saint's Window and dates to the earliest part of the 20th century. To the left you have St Margaret of Antioch, for whom this church is named. In the middle you've got St Mary the Virgin with the infant Christ, and to the right you've got St Alban. And below are scenes from the lives of each of those saints. This beautiful piece of stained glass once would have looked out onto the churchyard, but the church centre, which was built pretty much within the lifetimes of anyone aged 40 and above, it looks out onto that now, and the church centre does some amazing work in the local community. And you can well see why this is my favourite piece of stained glass. And I'll now take you to some of the other stained glass within the church before we head to the Lady Chapel. And this beautiful window here is my second favourite piece of stained glass within St Margaret's, Barking. And right next to it here, interestingly, is the tomb of William Pounset, who died in 1553, and he was the last steward of Barking Abbey. He was steward at the time of the Reformation when the abbey was taken down, and is buried here in the church in a place of honour. And at the time of the abbey, this man had the right to choose the vicar of this church. And you can see this tomb was repaired at the expense of All Souls College in Oxford, Anno Domini 1784, and that's who now, and since the time of the Reformation, has the right to choose what vicar is belonging to this church. William Pounset died on the 8th day of March 1553. You see William Pounset. And this is the Lady Chapel. You'll join me inside there now. And it is thought to be the newest part of the north aisle, which we've just been on. And this stained glass window that dominates the chapel here dates from 1913 and was given to the church in memory of Elizabeth Ann Martin by her son, and it portrays the crucifixion of Christ and is symbolic of sacrificial love. Of course, you have Christ in the centre, but on either side, to the left side, you have two very important saints on either side of the crucifixion scene. To the left side is St Erkenwald, who founded the abbey, so really without the abbey, this church, and without him, this church wouldn't exist. And to the right you've got St Ced. You've got St Erkenwald and St Ced flanking the crucifixion scene. And both of these men were instrumental in the conversion of the East Saxons to Christianity in the 7th century, and both served as Bishop of London. There we have St Erkenwald, St Ced, and of course, most prominently in the centre, you have Christ, the crucifixion, which represents a sacrificial love. You have another piece of stained glass over here to the left. And this is in memory of the mariners of Barking in this window. The Hewitts were a very well-known family in this parish. And beneath this window is a very, very interesting piece indeed, which likely would have come from the abbey. It's a 12th century stone tablet commemorating Maurice, the Bishop of London, from 1085 to 1108, and Alfgiver, the Abbess of Barking, at the time of the Norman Conquest. It was Alfgiver who sheltered the newly crowned William the Conqueror after violence erupted at his coronation in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day 1066. William sought a safe place to stay while his fortress, now the keep of the Tower of London, was being constructed, and the great abbey was close to London, accessible by a river, and offered the new king protection and his court, which they so dearly needed. William stayed at Barking for 3 months before returning to Normandy in March 1067. Upon his departure to Normandy, the king bestowed the royal patronage on the abbess Alfgiver, and Barking Abbey, a royal connection that persisted for centuries. He gave Alfgiver my peace and love, and all my right within and without the burg, fully as abbess in that monastery of St Mary, which had them in the time of King Edward. Leaving the Lady Chapel behind, we expose the very late medieval era roof beams, and these, before the 1770s renovation, had a false ceiling, so you wouldn't have seen these then. And last but very not least is this beautiful stained glass window that you see at the end, which you can see here. And this depicts Christ rising from the cross and into heaven. An apprentice piece from the Victorian era, and this is a remnant that was found in the old abbey when the excavation took place in 1911. And no one quite knows what exactly its purpose was. It may have been a coffin. It may have been used, is one belief, for the nuns to wash their hands before they went in to pray. And that, my friends, is the Church of St Margaret's at Barking. I hope you all enjoyed the tour. If you did enjoy the video, please don't forget to like, share, drop a comment and hit the notification bell so YouTube will let you know when I next upload. Thanks all, and I'll see you all on the next one.